Hello everybody, it is I, Brian the Pirate, and recently I posted a video for a Glacial Cascade build. The idea of the build being that I would freeze enemies with Glacial Lance and then one-tap them for millions of damage with Glacial Cascade. Someone left a comment on that video saying that they were very confused that the DPS number on their skill screen was higher than mine, and yet I was doing millions of damage whereas they were only just touching a million. And it made me realize that there's a lot of new players that have been introduced to Path of Exile 2 who aren't aware of one simple fact that many of us PoE 1 vets have learned for a long time. That's that the DPS number is a lie. Now, what I mean by that is the DPS calculation is, one, not taking into consideration a bunch of conditions that you may be meeting, but it's also making a bunch of assumptions on how you are using the skill that you're looking at. For example, DPS on this screen is taking into consideration your damage on your weapon or on the skill if it's a spell, take into account your attack speed on your weapon or your cast speed if it's a spell, then your critical chance and critical damage, and of course it's making the assumption that you are attacking all the time continuously, which many of you are probably hearing that now and going, oh yeah, no, that's generally not how most skills work, because you've got a dodge or whatever, or there's conditions that you need to meet in order to utilize that skill, particularly with those labeled as conditional or payoff, things like that. Then of course there's a bunch of gems that you can apply to your skills that add a condition that you need to meet, and if you meet that condition you gain a significant damage bonus. Likewise to the passive tree, you've got things where if the enemy is frozen you do increased damage, or if they're immobilized in some capacity you do increased damage, or in my case if they're frozen they have no resistances. None of that is taken into consideration when looking at this number. Now, let's for a moment actually look a little bit deeper using Glacial Cascade as an example. It actually works off as a really good example. It's a payoff skill. It's sweeping your quarterstaff upwards. You do an icy fissure, so you do a line basically, and the very tip of that like attack does enhanced damage, particularly against frozen enemies. So first of all, this damage number is based on the wave. If you're hitting them with the wave, you need to improve your aim. The bit you actually care about is the final burst. You want to hit them with the very tip of the skill, which obviously does significantly more damage. This number is still a lie. The reason it's a lie is because it's not even taking into account the actual conditions that you're most likely going to be using the skill, which is when they are frozen. If an enemy is frozen, you hit them. If they're a unique enemy, you do 425 more damage just because they're frozen. So that number is nowhere near what you're actually going to be doing just based on the actual function of the skill itself. Then you can have other things. In my case, I have combo finisher. So when I'm using combo finisher, not only does it mean that I can only attack when I have enough combo points, meaning attack speed is irrelevant because I can't spam the skill, but it also means that when I do use it, I get a 40% more damage multiplier. That likewise synergizes with this node here, where skills deal 90% increased damage per combo consumed up to 40%. I get 5 combo points, or rather Glacial Cascade requires 5 combo points, so I get that additional 40%. That's not taken into consideration. As I mentioned before, there's other things on the tree, like there's no resistance if they're frozen. When they're frozen, they get 50% increased damage. I think I have another one down here. Enemies frozen by you take 20% increased cold damage. None of these numbers are being applied. So just to summarize, the damage sheet on this skill thinks I'm only doing just over 68,000 DPS, when the reality is I'm meeting all of these conditions that vastly improves my damage to the point where actually I'm hitting things for nearly 3 million damage. So what does this mean when you are selecting gems and things like that, and you're looking at weapons and gear? It means that when the number doesn't go up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Like if I take out combo finisher, the number doesn't change because again, it's a condition that it doesn't assume I'm always meeting, so it doesn't apply it. So there are going to be points where you're going to read a gem and go, how can I, or read a skill, and maybe you've got a spare gem slot, or you're reviewing your skill gems. You're going to look at them and go, how can I potentially get more damage? And it may well be that you're just going to have to do a little bit of math in your head. And generally, to be honest, if it says more damage, it means it's a good thing, and you probably want that even if the damage doesn't go up. Obviously, take into consideration whether or not you can meet the conditions that are required. There's another gem called Pursuit, where if you hit them with the projectile skill, the melee skill that you socket Pursuit into will then gain 20% more damage. So putting that in, if you never do projectile attacks, would be stupid. But in my case, if I was throwing Glacial Lances and then I use Pursuit in Glacial Cascade, Pursuit would give me that 20% more damage. It also means that you want to take into consideration what kind of gear you get as well. As I mentioned, because I'm only using the attack sparingly once per boss or very, very tough or rare, for example, I don't care about attack speed, and that could mislead some people when they're looking for gear. For example, this weapon has about 500 damage on it, so 100, if we're looking at the max damage, 149 plus 340, I think was like 2 div when I got it initially. Now the DPS of my weapon is 565.83 damage per hour. Now if I search for a similar weapon, this one, 648 DPS, so I'm looking at this going, ooh, I do more DPS with this weapon, this would be an upgrade, so I spend 10 div. But the reality is, it's only because of the attack speed is faster. If I actually look at the damage, it's about the same. It's slightly more, very teeny tiny bit more, but it's about 500 total damage on the max end. So that would mean when I use it with Glacial Cascade, when I only press it once per boss, so attack speed is irrelevant, I've just spent 10 div to do the same damage. And like I said, there's a fair few skills that are like this, like Hammer of the Gods being one. Obviously, you've got to get enough glory, and then it's just one big hit. Things that have conditional payoff, etc. Things that you can't actually hold the button down for and constantly do. They're the most prominent examples. There are other scenarios where you're going to want to take things like this into consideration. But that's just generally the idea that I want to get across to you, that whenever you're looking at your DPS number, actually take into account how relevant that number is, because again, it's assuming that you're constantly attacking and takes into consideration your attack speed. And if it's a dot, most dots don't crit, for example, so you may be putting like crit gems in there when you can't crit in the first place or something like that. Or maybe you've got something socketed elsewhere or on your passive skill tree that means that critical strikes don't do actually more damage and things like that. Obviously, make sure that you're actually thinking about how the skill is utilized, and then you can make a more informed decision on what gear you're buying and things like that. So in my case, if I wanted an upgrade, I just want the same attack speed and just as much flat damage on the actual physical and cold as possible. That will mean that I will do subsequently more damage. For about 10 div, without attack speed, I could probably actually double my damage on this weapon. Quite literally, for 8 div, so cheaper than that other one, I would be able to get a weapon that does more damage with Glacial Cascade. Tooltip wouldn't say that, but this here does more damage, and therefore the individual hits would, the one single hit would be significantly more damage. So that I would be saving myself 2 div there. Hopefully that made sense, and if it did, you're welcome. Maybe you can thank me by liking the video and subscribing, and you'll get some more videos like this in the future, as well as another build guide that's coming up. I've done a Frost Darts Whispering Ice Spell Totems build, and it's rather delicious, I have to say, and you can look forward to that in the next couple of days. Otherwise, thank you all very much for watching. Farewell. I'll remember you.